Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. Today, we are talking to Melissa Turley. She is currently the executive director of the Teton Village Association. Melissa has quite an impressive background. She served on the Teton County Commission and Jackson Town Council for nearly a decade. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Emmy. I'm so glad to be speaking with you today.
Well, thanks for joining me. And I am impressed with your bio and the many things you've done. And you seem like such a person who loves leadership, because I read also that you helped found and served on the boards of Girls Actively Participating and Momentum. And just one at a time, tell me what each of those programs do.
Sure. I'll speak about Momentum first. We started talking about it about 15 years ago as a way to give back to the community in a collective effort. And it was premised off of the inspiration of a women's giving circle here in Jackson that really intended for women like we were at the time, younger women who didn't have the financial means to make as impactful philanthropic donations, but had time and talent and energy to give to making our community better. So we did spend quite a bit of time trying to think of how, again, we could have a collective impact that would bring the most benefit to the community. And we landed on the idea of a women's mentoring program. Both the mentees and mentors are all women. And we found that the value of that has just been exponential. The WOM mentoring program, as we called it, now has over 350 alumna. And what we didn't realize at the time was not only do we have the graduates, if you will, of the program who are serving in leadership roles across our community. I was just talking yesterday about how many are on the front lines of responding to COVID-19 right now, but also that the program has been something that has benefited all of the participants in really personal ways, both mentees and mentors.
And just building on that, what is the benefit of mentoring younger women? What is the benefit of doing that for women?
First of all, I think the benefit that was surprising to us that honestly we hadn't foreseen, and recall that most of the founders were in the mentee category, but really there was this great benefit to the mentors where we thought, we'll have to convince these women to give their time to serve in this teacher sort of role. And what we found was it was very hard to recruit mentors because a lot of the women that we approached, I would say, undervalued what it was that they had to teach and share. And so right there, just as we started having women participate as mentors in the program, there was more value for them in their experience and what they had to share. And part of the discussion that we had early on making this program specific by and for women was that while men have so much to teach about leadership, and all of us who were initiating the program had great male role models and mentors in our lives, the reality is that there are ways that women lead differently, and there are values that might be different, or behaviors. Certainly we're aware, I think more broadly, of more of the EQ and the emotional connection. And, really, I think giving value to that form of leadership and helping provide a place for both the mentees and the mentors to not necessarily have all of the answers and be able to work through their challenges with someone similar to them who, might have more or might have less experience than themselves.
And so then what was your desire to help found the Girls Actively Participating? Because that is another kind of leadership program, isn't it?
Absolutely. And my role with Girls Actively Participating was a little different. I did serve on the founding board, but really all of the credit goes to Amy Manhart, an amazing 8th grade science teacher at Jackson Hole Middle School. And Amy had been providing this program really of her own inspiration in her own time. And at that point where she decided to formalize and initiate a 501c3, she invited me and I believe 5 or 6 others to serve on the founding board. And so Girls Actively Participating is an after-school program for middle school girls that brings in leadership programming and activities for these girls to, again, really find their strength in a difficult time. I can't remember my own middle school without just thinking how incredibly difficult it was to understand my own identity and, negotiate just academics and friends. And I don't think leadership was a word that was in my vocabulary. And so for these girls to, have inspiring speakers come in and also be able, in a similar way to Momentum, also have a safe place where they're able to ask questions that they might feel embarrassed to ask somewhere else and find the support and the information that helps launch them further in their lives.
Well, I think it's such an inspiration that you've, like you said, maybe leadership wasn't a word in your vocabulary, but it's something that has always driven you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up down in Colorado, in Boulder and Denver, and I was just telling my 11-year-old about this last night, and it still chokes me up to think that my parents spent several years while I was about his age volunteering full-time for an organization with the mission to end the Cold War. And as I told him, they certainly can't claim all of the success, but thank goodness their work was successful and created a world for him to grow up in. And so they've always been such a great inspiration for me.
And that is an amazing story because that they did something and it had this profound effect on you till today. And so what was that work that they did?
The organization was called Beyond War, and they engaged in education and advocacy. As I said, we were living in Colorado, but they would travel all over the Rocky Mountain West and make presentations and speak to the media. My dad did a ambassador trip down to Central America and met with many of the national government leaders across Central America. And they also, in doing that work, were part of a really valuable community of people, like-minded people who were also contributing their time and energy and money into this important cause of, making sure the world didn't blow up.
Yeah, yeah. And then what was your journey to Jackson?
So from growing up in Colorado, I went to college in Montana, and, Wyoming was the place I had to go through in between. And it was actually my college boyfriend who decided he was going to move to Jackson Hole for a few months to fly fish. And I followed him. And 20 years later, we're married and still living in Jackson Hole.
Oh, wow. I love all these Jackson Hole stories. And I love how people come here and they're just like, okay, I'm never leaving.
Well, we tried to leave, we made an effort, but we were not successful, thankfully. So came back and had the opportunity to purchase a townhome with Jackson Hole Housing Trust. And that enabled us to put down the roots and be able to stay.
And what was because it sounds like you've developed so many leadership skills throughout your life. And it sounds like your parents were a big inspiration to you in doing that. And then what made you decide to run for Jackson Town Council?
Yeah, I had worked for the town previously in an administrative position, so I was familiar with what went on at Town Hall. And I felt like the mayor and council at the time when I first ran really wasn't representing myself and my friends. And really the critical issue for me at the time was workforce housing. I had just gotten, again, the opportunity to purchase a housing trust home, but had spent a fair amount of time really on the edge of not knowing whether I would be able to stay in Jackson or not. And I didn't feel like the people in local elected government really understood what that felt like. And so it actually started as a series of conversations with people to try to find a candidate that we would support for council. And those conversations often ended with people saying to me, well, if you're so passionate about it, why don't you do it? And I think it probably took 20 or 30 of those before I finally started thinking, well, maybe I will do it. Yeah, maybe I can do it. And that actually happened to be while we were running the pilot program for Mentoring. And Catherine Conover was my mentor. And through that experience, I think it really did help me connect with myself as a leader, which I don't think I had really identified or, embraced in the past. And that community of women that I was surrounded by through the Mentoring program gave me the courage to run.
And how are you involved in leadership across Wyoming? Because you've been in Leadership Wyoming, which I have too, yay. And so what has your experience been across the state in terms of women serving in politics?
Yeah, I also worked as the coordinator for the Wyoming Women's Legislative Caucus for a number of years, and that is a nonpartisan organization that celebrates the women in the legislature and also works to encourage other women to run. And when we started, I believe we had close to 20 women in the legislature, and when I stepped away from that work about 5 years ago, we were down to 9. And I can't say, the county commissions at the time were just about as bad. I know we have had 2 women on our commission here. Of course, when I stepped down and I was replaced by a woman, and then there are 2 women, I was going to say in Carbon County. So anyway, just very few numbers of women across the state, whether it's in state government or county government or city council. We do see a lot of women serving on school boards and hospital boards.
And why do you think that is?
I think part of that gets to the fact that women want to make their communities better for their families, and they see those school boards and hospital boards as a really direct way to impact education and health.
I believe that. When you said that, that's the immediate thought that came to my head.
Surprising.
Yeah.
And then, our legislature, I think, just clearly has so many barriers to participation. You imagine being a young working mom living in Teton County and trying to figure out a way to go to Cheyenne for 4 to 8 weeks of your winter, basically without pay. I mean, legislators get paid very small stipends. So, trying to imagine the kind of flexibility you would need with work or the financial situation you would need to be in, and how you would handle childcare. There's not a daycare at the Capitol. And then, of course, there's committee meetings and traveling all around the great state of Wyoming in between. So I think, some of the things that I've talked to folks, and actually in Leadership Wyoming, I had some really good conversations with people around the state about how we could look at changes to the legislature to make it more representative of the people of the state. I mean, one way to talk about would be to change the timing when the legislature meets. The winter schedule was set many, many years ago when the majority of those serving in the legislature were ranchers, and February was the best time to be away from the ranch. As our makeup of our legislature changes, and if we are interested in seeing more diversity, I think we would have better participation if we were to schedule the legislature in a month where travel is more easy, or perhaps even in a month where school is not in session, that parents might be able to travel or teachers might be able to serve.
I think that's a great idea. And I've thought a lot about that because people have said that. And as long as it's not in the summer, because we are so desperate for summer in Wyoming.
I know, I said that, and I thought, but it's really hard to ask people to, and then go lobby and advocate in the summer. But, and then, of course, a salary, which, I mean, I certainly understand that there's no, magic number that's right to pay people to serve in politics. But I do think that having a salary that allows working people to serve is really important. I was able to take advantage of that. I mean, that was the only way that I was able to serve, I guess, in elected office, is because the town council and the county commission do pay a salary here. And so it was not, a lot of money. It was not enough to be a full-time job. I needed to work in order to also put food on the table, and I think that's important too. I think it's good to find a balance so that electeds are able to be compensated for their time in some way, but it's also important to be out working and really understanding the community as well.
So do you think that was a real barrier to you because you were on the Teton County Commission, you were on the Jackson Town Council, and did you have a desire to serve statewide, but you wouldn't because you needed to support your family?
I don't know that I had a desire to serve statewide, but I can say those barriers kept me from pursuing it or really thinking of it as a possibility. And sometimes I tell people, I got elected when I was 30 years old, and I had my son while I was on the town council, and then ran for re-election on the council and ran for county commission. And I can see how much, obviously, being the mother of a young child complicates your life, and how much your child very much takes much time and attention. And so had I not already been in office, it would have been really difficult for me to take on a campaign with a young son. But because I had run a campaign before and because I was already in office, it was absolutely doable to run 2 campaigns with a small child.
Well, that's a really honest answer, because I think that when I think about running for office and the time it takes and the energy you have to put into it, and a lot of town council meetings are in the evening when you want to be home, when you want to be with your kid who's been in school all day. So I can see how you'd be torn on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it worked out well for me because while I was on town council, as I said, my son was born while I was on town council, and then he was small, and so honestly, a lot of that time he was going to bed at 6 or 7 p.m. So it kind of worked out for me to have the flexibility to be with him more during the day and then go to the council meetings at night, but that changes as they get older too.
Well, yeah, for sure. Just wait, Mom. Just wait. You're just getting into it right now. He's only 11. Yeah, you're going to be waiting up for him when he misses his curfew at night. You're going to be like, where were you? What are you doing? So my last question is, what wisdom and what opportunities can we provide for young women growing up today? And not just in politics, but just in life in general, to encourage women to be strong for themselves, really.
Yeah. Well, I think leadership really begins with self-awareness. And so I would really encourage young women to take the time to learn what's important to them, what they do well, identify some weaknesses to overcome, but maybe too identify some weaknesses that are okay to have and be okay with that. And to also identify a good community of support. And sometimes that community of support is 1 or 2 people. It doesn't have to be large. But I think that that's also really important, having a place where it's safe to ask for help when you need it.
And Melissa, you obviously have done that for yourself to put together a community of support. Was it women your age? Was it older women? How did you identify who was going to be a person that you would trust and be able to talk to?
Wow. I just feel so fortunate that I have had so many extraordinary women in my life, and they've just come into my life in these wonderful ways, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to hold on to those relationships. I would say Mickey Babcock is, I call her my spirit mom. She calls me her spirit daughter, and she definitely helped change the course of my life. We met one another probably about 16 years ago, and she is a force to be reckoned with in women's issues here in Wyoming and in our community and in other communities as well. And so she certainly has been a great role model and supporter and the wind beneath my wings and encouraging me that, when I thought I couldn't do something, that I absolutely could.
Well, it's good that you had that kind of inspiration. So thank you so much for talking to me.
Oh, thank you, Emmy. It was a pleasure.
Well, have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities.
Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.